Okay, so I now have 10 minutes to just talk about some of the work of the Centre in a little bit more detail. One of the things that we've been interested in is the policies for curriculum. And so I wanted just to highlight a few things for you today. I've put shining a light because I think that's what we think we do, that we interrogate policies carefully, we weigh up the research evidence and we say to ourselves, well, how good's the fit, how good's the match between the policies and the research? And of course, we directly research these things through our projects. So just to give a few ideas, I in my work, was part of the Cambridge Primary Review. At that time, I was at the Faculty of Education in Cambridge and worked with Robin Alexander, and that was obviously a formative experience for me and others. Grammar and writing is a strong theme. We've had a recent Nuffield project on that. We're in the middle of our Leverhulme project, and my colleague Jana is sitting here. Jana and I particularly working together. We've got mountains of data to analyse at the moment, 2 years of data, in fact. So we're enjoying that, and there is a book that has to be written, so we're slightly nervous. The already mentioned is the Independent Commission on Assessment in Primary Education, and Alice was a huge, important part of that, and that's one very important strand of her work. We have the wonderful Rethinking Curriculum project that we've only just started. It's fantastic to be working with the Chartered College, and again, we're very thankful to the Helen Hamlin Trust for supporting that work. And finally, from these quick examples, Teaching English Language and Literacy has just been published in its 5th edition, and multiple editions can be a bit boring, perhaps. But then I started to think, well, that's been going since 2001. That's more than 20 years of kind of trying to wrestle with the dilemmas, for example, between policy, practice, research, but also trying to provide something that's useful for trainee teachers and their tutors and so on. And I know there are other people in the room, not least Teresa, who's also produced fantastic, similar kinds of publications and so on. So, one of the curriculum problems we think, maybe I think quite a lot, and certainly my colleague Charlotte Hacking, who's here as well, who I will explain why I've mentioned Charlotte in a moment, but this study was the paper that's been alluded to. So Alice and I, we set out to study through a survey the phonics screening check, because there was a particular moment during COVID when the children weren't being tested, and we saw it as an opportunity. We also thought, well, hang on, there's a story to tell here about what does the research say about how children best learn to read. Some would say crucial topic. Perhaps most people in primary education would say, crucial topic. We were quite shocked by the media attention. It's not always that, research papers, of course, can be very quiet and have a long, slow burn and influence that way. And just occasionally, things sort of enter the public space. I've shown you there the piece in the New Scientist that Colin Barras did a brilliant job at talking to various researchers around the world, about some of the issues, and has done a very responsible piece of journalism. Not all the journalism is like that, as we know in other areas. Anyway, the paper was part critique, and it did offer some recommendations for the way forward, but a paper is not the place to go into the real details of practice. And so, with Charlotte Hacking from the Centre for Literacy in Primary Education, we proposed to Routledge a book, and we've actually finished it. It's not published yet. It's due to go into production at the end of the month. But I just wanted to share one thing from it that we've created completely new. And so this is our theory and model of teaching. And in the chapter that this is in, we deconstruct several very influential theories and visual models, but none of those are really about teaching. This one is about teaching. We're calling it the double helix of reading and writing. You can see there is the book title and so on, and the image will be freely available through Creative Commons. And I'm just going to quickly go through some of the key elements of it, why we think we hope reflects well what happens when teachers work with children to help their reading and writing, and that's crucial. And I was talking to Steve Graham earlier, who's one of our keynotes, about the work he's done on saying reading helps writing and writing helps reading. And I think in some discourse we've lost sight of that a bit. Anyway, so to begin at the top and the bottom, you hopefully won't be surprised that we feel that the child and their languages, thinking of what Li Wei has just said, is the starting point for where the teaching has to begin, but also understanding the environment that the child lives in at home, brings into the school, and their truthful engagement with texts. I think teachers sometimes, and educators and others, can make assumptions about children's environments and the texts they encounter, but we need to know as best we can about what that's like for the children. And so you'll notice on these strands, oh, the green blobs have gone mad. Okay, you'll notice on these strands that if you start with reading and go up the strand, you end up with writing and vice versa. And that, of course, is a heuristic to say that we think teaching needs to connect these pretty much, frankly, in every lesson. If you're trying to deliver, say, good phonics teaching, then these need to be connected, and they need to be connected with the other elements of the model. So, right at the heart for us is the motivation of the child and their search for meaning. And those are reflected in both the composition of writing and obviously the comprehension of language and in reading comprehension terms. Moving to the other spaces in the model, the very young child, the baby, for example, encounters sound in their environment through the auditory system, and in time, phonological awareness develops. At the same time, they encounter objects. Very young children will encounter objects, and obviously they play with them and they manipulate them and they're curious. And in time, they will be actually able to make marks that are the fledgling aspects of writing. Moving forward, and of course all of these things are not simple linear lines. That again depends on the child, the teacher, and so on. But the bigger structures of text become important. Words clearly are very important, getting a concept of word and so on. But also the fact that words are contextualized in sentences. And if you decontextualize a phoneme, a letter, from words, sentences, and even arguably whole texts, then we don't think the teaching will be as effective. And obviously we present evidence based on randomized controlled trials and systematic reviews and meta-analyses that show that these aspects need to be taught like this. And yes, of course, there are people who try and say that I'm a sort of phonics denier. I am not. To be clear, yet again, I think phonics is really important, but it has to be absolutely put in its place. So you'll see there that, of course, we want children. Actually, an interesting statistic from a neuroscientist in the States reckons that 60% of children need systematic phonics teaching, and that therefore 40% don't. I'll leave that one for you. And this is my little bit of fun, but it's also one of the many things that Charlotte has brought to this project is real books by real authors that are incredible. I cannot believe Charlotte's knowledge of children's literature, her relationships with authors, astonishing. And you can see that I think using Stanley stick is better than the DFE's big synthetic phonics stick. So that's enough from me. We're all very excited to hear our first keynote speaker, Teresa Kremen, who's an absolute authority and has extraordinary networks and knowledge, which I can't wait to hear about.